special election.
Good morning. How are you? I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me today.
You bet. We're ready when you are.
All right, sounds good. I'm Jennifer Terry, and I'm in charge of the Central Iowa Source Water Research Assessment Project, CISWRA for short. I've got three co-presenters today who are three scientists that are part of our team on the project, and I'll have them introduce themselves briefly before we get started. So Mary, would you kick us off? She's my science co-lead on the project.
Sure. Hi, I'm Mary Skopak. I'm day job is Iowa Lakeside Laboratory Executive Director up here in Northwest Iowa, formerly of the Iowa DNR, and I'm the science co-lead on this project. I'm going to have Elliot Anderson speak next.
Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Elliot Anderson, and I'm a research scientist over at the University of Iowa. And my role on this project is the main research support specialist. So last but not least, we have Calvin.
Good morning. I'm Calvin Walter, retired from the Iowa DNR after 35 years and now working part-time for the Iowa Geological Survey. I'm the GIS analyst, looking mainly at watersheds and a lot of water-related data.
Thank you. So I think we're going to dig in here. We've got some slides to show you, and then I think we'll have a little bit of time for question and answer. So we will get rolling. So a little roadmap for today. We're going to do quick project updates and then a peek at the science. We are still in the process of doing analysis and collection of data sets. But we'll give you a peek at what we're looking at, which is really interesting. And also we've decided on our name of our final report, which we're unveiling to you today, called Currents of Change. And so our very own Myron in our communications department is doing the design for us. And so we're pretty thrilled about that. And then some upcoming milestones in the project. So here we go. So just as a reminder, Currents of Change, our final report will be released in early 2025 for your viewing and approval probably in March of 2025. So between now and then, we'll be wrapping up our data analysis and coming up with our recommendations and action steps. Everything we do now is built around these four interests: river and lake recreation, secure, safe drinking water sources, ecology and river life, so fishing, angling, bugs, everybody and animal that depends on the rivers, and then the flow. So what does a river flow, high, low, and trends mean for us? Right now we have over 2,000 hours of analysis and research from our research scientists. We have about 14 scientists on the project. They are from Iowa and 3 other states. And so a couple of them are with the United States Geological Survey, a couple are with Argonne National Laboratory in Chicago, and one gentleman is Dr. Peter Levi from Wisconsin. So he was at Drake University previously. So that's our team. Key project updates right now. We've been reviewing dozens of data sets, literally hundreds of journal articles, reports, and studies that Elliot Anderson, that you met a minute ago, has been pulling at the request of the advisors. We've broken into teams around chemistry, microbiology, all sorts of ways we can dissect what's going on in the rivers and find out what's in the rivers and what can we do to help improve the water quality. as pertains to Polk County, but also it's going to have far-reaching effects upstream and probably downstream. I think the report will be of interest to a lot of people within our watersheds and also outside. I've met with over 40 groups, agencies, nonprofits, and organizations. I want to bring all of our community partners along with us so that, first of all, they understand what we're doing, and that we can get feedback from them about what's important to them about the rivers. And so, and we had community listening sessions that we held in May. So over the course of 2 days, we had 5 different sessions built around those chapters, river recreation and so on. We had about 20 different entities who joined us virtually for those listening sessions to tell us what challenges they see with our rivers. We had about 40 participants in those meetings over 2 days. So we were very pleased with the turnout. They did identify some gaps in some of our analysis, and so that was great. That's exactly what we wanted to hear. They also validated a lot of the things that we're seeing and that we're working on. So we had urban planners from the suburbs, we had people from the city, we had people who do urban and rural land development. So John Swanson was on, some folks, agronomists from Heartland Farmers Co-op were on, some hunters from the Iowa Conservation Alliance were on. So we had a really great turnout, a diverse mix of people on those calls. Mock Sucheska was on those calls, great interaction in terms of the immigrant and refugee communities and their uses of our river, and we definitely want to engage with them more in the coming months. And now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Skopek.
All right, thanks, Jen. So again, just to remind everybody of the scope of the project, you know, our goal is to be comprehensive in this assessment. Oftentimes people hear about the impaired waters list that comes out every couple of years from the Iowa DNR. And, you know, if we look at the entire water quality universe of every location in the watershed, every contaminant, in the impaired waters list format, you know, you have to have a stream with a designated use, then that contaminant has to have a water quality standard, and then you have to have water monitoring data to come up with that list, which is, if you look at those funnels, more and more restrictive and does not give you a full picture of what water quality is really like in the watershed. And so we're taking a different approach. Next slide. And again, if you look at that impaired waters list, the vast majority of stream segments in the CISWRA watershed have not been assessed. And so again, it's limiting in understanding what's going on. And you know, a number of the water bodies don't have water monitoring so that they don't have enough information, and only, you know, about a quarter of the watershed is actually assessed for impairment under the Clean Water Act impairment kind of protocol or methodology. Next slide. So, you know, the way that CISWRA is different from previous assessments is it is that comprehensive approach. We're not only looking at things that have standards, but things that are on the forefront. Emerging contaminants, things that people are hearing about, but maybe doesn't have a regulatory framework yet. And we're looking at all existing and identifiable data and research that's out there. So, you know, Elliot has been pulling every research project that we can find and various data sets, really in a no stone unturned kind of perspective. And again, I think it's the most comprehensive assessment of this watershed that's ever been done. As you'll see today, you know, we're looking at every conceivable component of that. So whether you're looking at sort of toxic pollutants that people tend to think about, or things like sediment, you know, we're also looking at the hydrology, how much water is in the stream, how fast is it flowing. We're looking at the fish and the bugs, as Jen said, as well as, you know, physical parameters like the dissolved oxygen levels in the streams for aquatic life. And so we're really looking at it through that lens of drinking water, recreation, and ecology to give this really full picture of what's happening in the CISWRA watershed. And it's really meant to be actionable science. Nobody wants a report that just sits on a shelf. So what we're trying to do is look at these conditions and then think about recommendations to improve the water bodies. We'll have essentially 2 reports. One that is this very long, detailed sciencey report that documents all the work that Jen has shown you, 2,300 hours of work, as well as an executive summary that really gets to the key findings and recommendations that we think that you can take action on, both here in Polk County and then to your neighbors and partners to the north. And we're really looking at sort of out on the ground, hit the ground running, things that you can be working on. So today we're going to show you some preliminary results. I wouldn't take a screenshot and say that this is exactly what I would hang my hat on, but we're getting some good information. And so Calvin and Elliot are going to show you some of that preliminary data, and we could have hopefully a good discussion. Elliot.
Great, thanks, Mary. So what we wanted to do with the rest of this presentation was go into some of those key findings, some of the key facts that we hope to be sharing with everyone once this report comes out later in the year. And so here I have a map of Polk County over on the left. And since we are commissioned by Polk County to do this study, we're having a heavy focus on several of the major water bodies that are located in and around the county proper area in the Des Moines metropolitan region. So of course we're focusing on the water quality within the Raccoon and the Des Moines, the two major namesake rivers. We're also looking at Beaver Creek, 4 Mile Creek, Walnut Creek, things that are going on upstream in Saylorville. But as I like to say each time we're talking about this project, it's the nature of water and water quality, and that things are very, very much linked to what's going on upstream and downstream. So some of the water quality challenges that Polk County faces are often linked to some of the activities that are occurring farther upstream in different parts of the watershed. And so officially, what we're doing with this project, you can go back to that one more slide, Jen. Yeah, so officially what we're doing with this project is focusing on the entire Des Moines and Raccoon River watershed. So that's what I've got shown over here, the map on the right. So any data set that lies within that larger red delineated watershed area is what we're focusing on here. So yes, while we are of course looking at the Des Moines and Raccoon within the city proper, there are many other things that we're exploring upstream as part of this project as well. So just as an example, what we're able to do is take a look at stream flow records. And so what we've got shown on this slide, these are all of the locations that the United States Geological Survey monitors within that red watershed I had shown on the previous slide. So we can see we have about 25 gauges which stream flow records are taken every day. And what this plot is showing is the historical length of each one of these gauges. So each dot on this plot here is a year in which we've been collecting stream flow data. So notice that some of these sites go back quite a long time. Obviously, in the more recent years, we have more sites and more good water stream flow data. But at several locations, including some of the ones in and around the Des Moines area, we have stream flow records going back many, many decades and almost 100 years in some cases. So this is a nice, robust data set that we've been able to isolate and take a look at specifically. Next slide, please, Jen. And so some of the types of analysis that we're looking at when we have these long-term records is we can really get a sense for how the stream flow has changed throughout the year, and that's what we tried to summarize with this graph in this slide here. So what each of these three plots shows is that for a given year, and this is the stream flow values that are just below the confluence of the Des Moines and Raccoon River, so right in the heart of downtown Des Moines. The plot on the top left shows the minimum flow that occurs in each year. The plot in the middle at the bottom shows the average flow in every year, and then the plot on the top right shows the maximum flow that's occurred. And what we're able to do is analyze how these different parts of the stream flow different parts of stream flow behavior have changed throughout time. And so we've done this for one example here, but it's a pretty similar story with each one of the long-term gauges that we have throughout the watershed. And what we're finding is that the low flow conditions are substantially higher than they were in the past. So generally, the streams throughout the Des Moines watershed area, the flows don't get as low as they were in the 1950s or 1960s. So it's probably something to do with changes in upstream land use, changes in climate. But we see that the low flow conditions now are higher than they've been previously. We see another increase during average flow conditions and at high flow conditions, but it's a little more modest. So it's fair to say that there's more water now in the rivers typically than there's been in previous decades. But it really is that low flow condition that's seen the greatest increase throughout the years. Next slide, Jen. So the reason this is important is because stream flow, the amount of water that's in these rivers at any given time, is inextricably linked to all the different aspects of water quality that we care about. So a lot of times it dictates how many of a certain type of pollutant are in the water. A lot of times it dictates the recreational potential of the water. A lot of times it dictates the aquatic health of the water. And so there's really no better thing to show that with than nitrates. That's what we've got shown on the plot here. This is at the Raccoon River at Van Meter. So this is a site not too far upstream from where the Des Moines Water Works intakes some of their water from the Raccoon River there. And you can see that the average nitrate concentration is very closely linked, and this is just early spring and summertime nitrate concentrations, when those values tend to be the highest historically. See that it's very closely linked with the amount of water that's in the river at the same time. But often it's not quite just as simple as more water equals more of a pollutant. And with nitrate specifically, what tends to happen is that if there's a dry year, we don't see a lot of nitrate. Not a lot of it is remaining upstream in several of the soils and on several of the fields. But you have a wet year following that, as we're seeing now in 2024, that causes the nitrate concentrations that have built up in the previous year to make their way back into the river. And so that presents a challenge, because nitrate is both a contaminant that's harmful if you ingest it, but it also has some ecological, it can also cause ecological troubles as well by triggering some of the harmful algal. So I'm going to just scroll to the next graphic, Jen. So I just wanted to show that nitrate concentrations from year to year are very, very dependent on whether or not we're in a drought. And really, it's not just nitrate. It's pretty much everything that we're talking about in this report. So just wanted to make sure everyone's aware of that, because we are going to spend a good amount of this analysis talking about Iowa's hydrologic history, but it's very, very important to everything else that we cover. So a couple of more points on nitrate here. And Jen, you can keep going through the animations. Pull up the other bullet points, please. So this is back at that same slide, or back at that same site. These are the historical nitrate concentrations that have been collected throughout the year on a daily basis. So you can see the fluctuations. And you can see that historically we've had quite a few number of observations that have been above that 10 milligram per liter threshold, which is what has traditionally been used as the drinking water standard. So when this water goes into the Des Moines Waterworks, they work hard to treat it and make sure it's below that 10 milligrams per liter. But there's also been some additional science that's been conducted in the public health sector throughout the year, and people are finding that there may be some more negative human health impacts for drinking water that's below that, drinking water that's a few milligrams per liter below that 10 milligrams per liter threshold that we've had historically. And so, next slide, please, Jen. What we've been able to do with this project is work outside the traditional regulatory framework, as Mary had mentioned before. So this is a plot showing in the Raccoon River the number of days each year in which the nitrate concentrations have been above 5 milligrams per liter. So we can see in some years it's quite a few. It's a majority. We've got 100, 200 days. And so this is a little bit concerning as regards to human health, because there is some evidence that drinking water continuously that's above this 5 milligram per liter threshold for a long term may be carcinogenic, may cause some certain forms of cancer. And then additionally, I pull up the next animation, Jen. Additionally, there's also this ecological health impact. So when you have large amounts of nitrate in the stream, it's what causes algae to grow. And so some of the algal blooms that we see in Iowa and then also the downstream are caused by these excessive nitrate concentrations. The next slide. So another thing that we were able to investigate within this project was the amount of fishing and angling that takes place within the Des Moines metropolitan area. And so just recently, the IDNR has completed this nice, they call it Creole survey, so a survey of the different anglers, the type of fish that they're collecting, their behaviors. And so we've been able to go through and pull out some interesting tidbits about recreational fishing behavior that's present within the Des Moines area. But one thing that was a little bit enlightening to us is that fishing is a lot more than a hobby for some of the people that congregate and fish regularly throughout the Des Moines region. It's really a subsistence source of food for many of these families. So I've got a few bullet points here that we all thought were very interesting from this survey that we'd like to share with you guys. So 70% of urban residents within Iowa as a whole say they do have some interest in fishing. So for the majority of these people, it's a hobby, but for several of them, it's more than that. Within Polk County alone, they've had over 32,000 fishing licenses purchased in the year 2019. So it's a big, big industry, one of the larger recreational activities that we have in the state as it regards to water. Polk County, because of the larger population, but also because it has several of these well-known water bodies and fishing locations, is the most frequently fished county in the entire state of Iowa. And there's a big contingent that are locals. So many people that live around the area, they found this 15% of people travel 10 blocks or less to use to use a local water body to fish there. So it's very much neighborhood activity. And then 47% of anglers, specifically at two of the major locations we have in Des Moines, which is the Scott Avenue and Center Street dams, they say that this fish that they collect in these water bodies is an important food source for their family. So again, it's more than just a hobby for these people. It has a lot of meaning. And then the last point I wanted to make is with regards to fishing group is they did a demographic survey of people who were doing this. And it's very interesting. So the demographic makeup, people that use these urban fisheries, it's much more diverse than people that use the fisheries in the rest of the state. So on the right pie chart here, we have the ethnic makeup of fisheries throughout the entire state, and it's something that aligns pretty closely with the demographics of Iowa as a whole. But with the urban fisheries, it's different. Even though Polk County is more diverse than the rest of Iowa, we really have a large amount of minority groups fishing rivers. Next slide, Jim. And so lastly, I just wanted to touch briefly on bacteria. So this is another big issue that people are concerned about. Anytime you go recreating within one of the water bodies, there's a chance that you could come into contact with some sort of bacteria that you could ingest and potentially lead to some sort of negative human health impact or sickness. And so what we've got shown here is all of the data that's been collected for a specific form of bacteria called E. coli, which we tend to use as a gauge for how much harmful bacteria is present within a water body as a whole. And we're showing is during the different summer months when people are most likely to be out recreating, the amount of samples that have been collected that are above or below specific health thresholds. So we have these levels that are related to swimming, that are related to paddling, got shown on this plot here. And so just 2 points I wanted to make is that there's a lot of variation. So it's really hard to track down at any specific time whether or not water is going to be safe or unsafe for a person to go into. But we can make some general points, some general observations based on the data that's been collected. And so the first point is that the rivers and streams tend to have a higher bacteria count than the beaches, and the beaches tend to have a higher bacteria count than the lakes. So next slide, Jen. And then we can break this down a little more. And so in this plot, I've got the number of samples which have dangerous or unsafe levels of E. coli for many of the different rivers and streams that are located around the Des Moines metropolitan area. And we've broken those down by low and low and high flow conditions. And so what we can say here is that there's always a little bit of risk. Even at low flows, some of these stations will have some bacteria in them that can potentially be harmful from time to time. But we know that under higher flow conditions, there tends to be a greater risk. And that some of the sites that I've got shown here are from urban areas, and some of them are from rural areas, and there's a signature in both of them that relates to different sources that could cause these bacteria. So in urban areas, you might have wastewater treatment plants that are putting some of these in rural sites. You might have some suspended sediment that's getting kicked up during larger events. There's some erosion that's happening, but it's an issue that we have in both of these sites in both of these type of landscapes that we've been investigating. So now we'll turn it over to Calvin to talk a little bit about some of the mapping.
Thank you, Elliot. So one of the things, of course, that we're looking at are the confined animal feeding operations within Iowa, and specifically within the Des Moines and Raccoon River watersheds. Unfortunately, we know locations of the facilities, but we don't know the amount of manure that they're applying, where they're applying it, exactly when they're applying it. But we can kind of aggregate the locations into these little, what we call HUCs, or hydrologic unit codes, which are like a little watershed, and then compare the number of animals within those HUCs to the amount of row crop available to put the manure on. And when you get above about 1.5 animal units, which one cow is an animal unit and 2.4 pigs is an animal unit, or 2.5. So when you get above 1.5 animal units per acre, and I'm looking at both the corn and soybean acres, because we don't know if farmers are applying their manure to soybean acres or not, but if they are, and it's above 1.5 animal units, you are going to start reaching the agronomic limits of the amount of nutrients that are in your manure with the amount of land that you have to apply it to. So that's, as you can fortunately see, that there aren't a lot of animal units near Polk County or even Boone and Story and Dallas, but you get further up in the watersheds and you see a lot more animal units up there. The next slide, please. We're also looking at the hydrology and the stream channels and the networks and how they impact the aquatic life and also recreation on the watershed. Many of the small streams in Iowa have been straightened or channelized over the years. You can look at that on the left picture, the left map, showing that the darker the color, the more sinuous it is, and the lighter the color, the straighter the channel is. And because those channels have been straightened, that shortens the distance between the two endpoints, and so that increases the slope of the channel. So on the right, you can also see the slope of the channel, with the larger stream segments usually having a lower slope, and then those short, smaller headwater streams having a steeper slope. Well, the steeper slope creates faster water, which erodes more, and because it's in the small streams, it tends to erode down and holds the water and distributes it to the lower in the watershed to the larger streams, and causes more erosion in those larger streams. So if you would go to the next slide. And in the urban areas, you have a double whammy in that you have less permeable area or more impermeable areas. And so you get more runoff into those small first and second order streams that then gets down to the third, fourth larger streams faster, and creates deeper channels. So you can see that in the agricultural and suburban settings, if you go back a little bit, yeah, the streams are only about 2 meters deep, whereas you get into the urban setting, they're 2.4 meters deep. And even the larger third and fourth order streams are deeper in the urban areas. So go ahead, Jen. And so this erosion that occurs downstream happens both in urban settings and in rural settings in the larger streams. And it creates these cut banks that collapse, fall in, and you get trees falling in. The lower picture on the right, I believe, is in Walnut Creek watershed. So it encroaches on people's property, also can impact other infrastructure like roads and bridges. And these large erosion rates also degrade the stream habitat, filling it in with silt, which covers the cobble and gravel that fish need for their reproduction, and also for the benthic macroinvertebrates, the small little bugs that they feed on to live. And it can also then impede where people can canoe and kayak because of the trees falling in, the blocks of sediment falling in. So go ahead, Jen. And this is kind of an example of what happens over about an 11-year period. We have LIDAR data from 2009, 10, and 2020, which gives us an elevation of every square meter of land in the state. And if you look on the photo on the left, the 2009 CIR, you can see this is at the lower or farther down in 4 Mile Creek, where Little 4 Mile Creek comes in from the right. And you can see those two arrows where you have two really big meander bends that come across. And in the central photograph, those two meander bends have been cut off because of erosion, high flows overtopping the bank and then cutting through. And then with our LIDAR data, we can then compare the data from 2009 with 2020 and show where the erosion has occurred, and then also where deposition. So where it's red, the darker the red, the more erosion going on, and then the darker the blue, the more deposition is going on. And so these small streams feeding into larger streams with faster water and more volume really creates a problem with these streams further down that are larger, and the ones that people are going to be recreating on. So I think one more. Yep.
Thanks, everyone. I'm just going to wrap it up now. I think and hope it's pretty plain to see the work that they've been doing and will continue to do is going to have a lot of impact with our partners around the community, and They're going to come up, we're having a work session in July where all of our scientists are getting together in the same room. We're going to hash out what some recommendations are going to be with action steps on how to deal with some of the issues that you're seeing today. So just as far as milestones, in July, we're having our work session for recommendations. We're on our second draft of the report. We're working through a lot of edits because, as you can tell, what they're giving me is very science-y. I'm not a scientist, not my background, so we're working to get that down to usable form in an executive summary. Also, we're going to reconvene with some of our community groups this fall, and we're just going to sort of test our recommendations. Are we getting what you think we need to be talking about, and get them involved and have some buy-in around the project. And then we'll be making our final edits in January. And like I said, we'll be coming to you early next year. That's it for today. I can hang around for a few questions, and I think the scientists can too if you have any.
The only question I had, but I think you answered it when you say your work is going on the slide where there was more bacteria typically present at high or low levels, and you had two sites, an urban site and a rural site on page 10. I know ICON has hired and working with IDNR about these wastewater treatment plants, especially around the Beaver Creek area, I think. So that's where they're finding out, you know, if you put a new treatment plant and they're working on it, it makes a huge difference. So I'm assuming you're working on the bacteria and all that's going in that Beaver Creek
Yeah, we've
area.
talked with both ICON several times, and then also the DNR. Mary, did you want to weigh in on that one? Elliot.
Yeah, I mean, so we definitely know that the Beaver Creek is a wastewater issue, and so the good thing is there's some data that show, you know, before the improvements happen, what the levels were and the benefit of doing that improvement. So, you know, that's the hindsight kind of data set that we have right now, but going forward, that's going to be something that is definitely improved. And one of the things that we're hoping to do is to provide the county metrics that they can continue to look at going forward. So, you know, revisiting some of these analyses over time to show improvements where work has been done.
Our hope is to have key findings and then suggestions for, like Mary said, revisiting every few years by the county. Are we making progress? If not, what else needs to be done, and so on. So it remains a useful document.
Great, good work.
One of Elliot's slides had to do with nitrate in the water, these huge spikes and non-spikes and so forth. And there's a period of time in there, 2015, looks like 2016, when it's run pretty high. Was there flooding there that contributed to that? Do we know, or what happened there? Do you know, Elliot?
Oh, you're on mute, Elliot.
Jen, would you mind scrolling back to that slide because we have all these things up right now? I don't remember the specific number, but I believe it was the one with the daily nitrate data.
Page 7.
That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's a little difficult in any particular instance to say there was a large flood going on that caused a lot of this nitrate to be used. I don't think in that particular time the water was there was any sort of astronomical event that would have caused that much nitrate to enter the river. So sometimes it's a little bit tricky to pin down any specific event. Mary, was there something you wanted to add?
Yeah, so one of the things that we've been dealing with this cycle of drought and really low levels, and then we get flow coming out of that. In 15, we definitely had a lot of rain come later in the season, and so we saw, mobilization of that nitrogen from the soil after a drought period. And a lot of those spikes that you see are really coming from that drought, rain cycle. And so right now I know that you're dealing with the fact that we've had several years of drought and now rain. And so Waterworks is dealing with that sort of mobilization that's all hitting the river at the same time. And that's kind of the small picture of operational work that we're trying to also provide over this, long-term record, what's happening in these, 2 to 3 month windows.
Yes, it's a good point. With nitrate specifically, it's more the change from dry to wet rather than it is just a very large amount of water coming through. So I think, like Mary said, that was probably the culprit there.
Okay, thanks. My other question has to do with nitrates also. We've invested a lot of money into these devices we put in these buffer strips that, basically act like almost laterals for septic tanks, kind of the same principle. spreading the nitrate out into the soil and before it gets into the water. And one reason the board supported that, and it has supported that, is because we think we have the ability to measure before and after. Have you guys done any before and after measuring, particularly on 4 Mile Creek, not just 4 Mile Creek specifically, but, widespread measurements so we can know that it's working or not, I guess is my bigger point.
You mean whether the saturated buffers that we've been investing in with the batch and build? We haven't specifically done testing around those batch and build projects, like in and out. I'm not sure if John Swanson and Rich Leopold's crews have been doing that particular monitoring, but Mary or Elliot, what would we be measuring around Walnut Creek, 4 Mile Creek?
4 miles where we initially put them, and I think Walnut Creek's got some now too.
Yeah.
And some of that you do see improvements. One of the things that I think is going to be interesting, and you can kind of see it in the graph that you have there, is there's sort of an overall downward trend, but within that are these sort of spikes. When we look at some of the information, we had to look at data that had already been collected. And so if that project did not have before and after monitoring or upstream, downstream, we didn't have the time and resources to do that. But you can pull out some of that at a more micro scale, and we can show you some of that Walnut Creek or 4 Mile Creek data. The challenge is that sometimes, you build a batch and build, and then you go into drought. So then you don't have any mobilization, and if they didn't collect data, in this last year, in the last couple months, we may not be able to show that. So that's the challenge with project level data. Sometimes the weather cards aren't in your favor.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just add that some of the sites we focused on here that have longer nitrate records, those tend to be the bigger rivers with more water going through them. And in that case, it's just really hard to pinpoint the effect of any particular practice, like a buffer strip or wetland installation, because there's so much water coming in from the upstream parts of the watershed. You really need to focus to see specific results. You really need to focus on the smaller streams like Walnut Creek or 4 Mile. But unfortunately, because those have been smaller, there's not the robust record of historical data. So it's just another challenge anytime you're trying to look at how things have changed throughout time.
Yeah, we met with Ted Corrigan and Nathan Casey at Des Moines Waterworks several times, and they've been really helpful, and Jeff Mitchell, their lab manager. But, we keep talking among the advisors that we look at trends and things, but the people stay awake at night at Des Moines Waterworks trying to treat the peaks. So what will we be able to say about that? Because they knew this was probably going to be coming at them because it's being stored upstream in the watershed, So now we're seeing kind of what they predicted, which is the clash between water quality and water quantity demands. So we're internally talking all the time about what can we do with Central Iowa Waterworks and Des Moines Waterworks to help them better understand when a harmful algal bloom with toxins is going to hit, or what we might be expecting according to the trends. Mary, were you going to add something?
Yeah, I think we can circle back to 4 Mile Creek. One of the things that we've seen there too is as Ankeny has taken their wastewater offline and added that to Des Moines, that kind of creates a little bit of confusion in the data because so much of the water was coming from the wastewater treatment plant. But we can circle back and see specifically if there's anything that we can say about the saturated buffers and that kind of thing in the creek.
Well, I think
I would like to add the Iowa Geological Survey is currently working on a couple of projects where they're monitoring saturated buffers. They're not in the Des Moines or Raccoon River watersheds, but they are saturated buffers and trying to see how much of a reduction you'll get from a saturated buffer. And so I'm not sure when the study will be done, but maybe by next year we'll have some data on that.
One of the things you're going to see is that we're having gaps in data. So Calvin said we don't know how much manure is going on from the CAFOs because there's no record of it, public record. So there's a big gap in the data. It's a black box. How much is being applied? Where is it being applied? Which parcels is it being applied to upstream? So we're finding, for example, different gaps in our data sets that we'll recommend that we do more monitoring on that, just so everybody in the public knows what's coming at them and what's happening upstream. So I think that's one of the important things we're uncovering is that there's gaps in the data that people don't have access to.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yep.
Thank you.